Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it is time for my review of the debut album from Snails. This one is called The Shell. Snails is a Quebecois DJ and producer who is, in my opinion, probably better known for his branding than anything. Go to any dubstep or bass music show and you're probably gonna find someone with either a Snails snapback or shirt of some kind. Although second to that, I'd probably say Snails is best known for his very unique and unsettling sound design, which has been fittingly called vomit step by the masses. I originally discovered Snails around the time that he released his first collaboration with Botnet called Kermit in late 2013, although I wouldn't necessarily say Snails piqued my interest until probably mid-2015 when he released songs like Frog Bass, Funk With Me, of course that collaboration Holla Out with Jack U. That Skrillex and Diplo collaborative album ended up actually winning a Grammy, so I'm pretty sure that means Snails has a Grammy too, meaning he's one of the only dubstep producers in history to have ever earned one. Needless to say, I've got a lot of respect for this guy. You know, Snails started from the bottom and he worked his way up using his own distinct branding and production style, and now he's one of the best known dubstep producers out there. He deserves it. Now I'm not going to go and say that I'm all out Vomit Squad or anything like that, but I do have a lot of respect for Snails, and you know, I had my expectations set very high when he announced this debut album. So I guess the big question is, how did it turn out in the end? Well, you know, this album, it's okay, and I'll say I'm not going to completely grill Snails because this album actually is decent. I do enjoy a fair majority of the content on this album, but it also does have a lot of problems. One of the things that I've really enjoyed about Snails in the past as a producer is his ability to lay his production style across a variety of different subgenres like electro house, bass house, even glitch hop. On The Shell though, Snails really doesn't showcase that ability. I mean, we do get some hints of trap music, future bass, even a little metal and orchestral elements, but other than that, this album is almost entirely BROSTEP. If there was going to be a quintessential piece to me loving this album, it was going to be in its diversity, and since Snails didn't really bring that forward with this album, he would have had to make up for it in a number of different places, like its concept, its flow, its guest list. So let's talk about some of those, starting with the concept. Well, I guess it doesn't really have much of one. Remember what I said earlier about Snails' branding being very central to his identity as an artist? That comes back on this album and probably a little bit too much. Although this is found all across the album, it's probably the most noticeable on the song The Anthem, which explicitly mentions terms like Vomit Squad. Although its screaming vocals seem to be trying to pull some kind of emotion from the listener, it doesn't really do anything that impactful. In fact, this song has arguably one of the cringiest vocal appearances I have ever heard in a dubstep track, saying, "I'm not afraid of God, I'm with the Vomit Squad," like religion and EDM can't go hand in hand, which, spoiler alert, they can. The production on the song is actually pretty decent. It's a real heavy hitter and it's led by this kind of really crunchy sound during the drop, but whatever Snails was trying to do with the production here is just completely masked over by these absolutely terrible vocals, and I can't put myself through listening to it. Next up on the list, did Snails make up for it in the album's flow? No, not really. As I mentioned earlier, I had really high expectations for this album, and part of that was because on the surface, this track list is really nicely set up with an intro track at the beginning and an interlude track featuring Varian toward the end of the track list. Speaking of which, this was actually Varian's last track before retiring that alias. RIP Varian. With that, I kind of figured that this album was going to have a really cohesive sound to it, probably play out like a story from track to track, but it just doesn't happen. And you'd think, especially with these tracks being generally 150 BPM BROSTEP music, that he'd be able to kind of transition these from track to track, being able to kind of make it work a little bit like a mix album, but it just doesn't happen. All of these tracks are so disconnected from each other. Even the intro, it kind of surprised me. It just gets cut off right at the end before we get into the second track, Smack Up with Foreign Beggars. On top of that, the intro isn't really that good either. It doesn't really set up the tone of the album super well, and really it's not that complex or epic in really any way. It's kind of just a guy saying The Shell, and it's kind of chopped and skewed a little bit, and it just isn't doing anything for me. I will admit though, the interlude on this album, The Rise featuring Varian, is actually one of my favorites that this album has to offer. It's absolutely epic, although I could deal without the kind of deep voice, "We will crush their puny rebellion" and everything. I thought that was kind of cheesy, and that only further leads into the anthem, which I've already voiced my very strong opinions on. In my opinion, this song actually would have made a better intro to the album than the Shell did. I really wish Snails would have done that. But like I said, you're not going to find a lot of cohesion from track to track on this album. You're not going to have any really nice sweeping transitions. Everything's basically just sharp cutoffs and startups. Really nothing Snails is offering in that field. So that brings us to our third point of redemption, the guest list. Snails brought the whole squad onto this album, with everyone from Sullivan King to Dion Timmer to Nightmare to Waka Flocka Flame. Just how well, though, that those appearances measured up are up to debate. For example, I feel like the Bermudian reggae artist Collie Buddz was severely underused on his feature, where he's not saying much more than, hey, feel the vibe, let's get lit tonight, hands up, hands up, hands up, hands up, etc., etc. I will say, though, that vocal appearances like this can be excused to some degree when the instrumentals are as stellar as they are on this track, and on top of that, I absolutely love the drop of this song. It's absolutely infectious and one of my favorites that the album has to offer. I will say, though, I do wish Big Gigantic played a bigger role in this song than they end up playing. I don't think Snails' chemistry with them was showcased as good as it was on Funk With Me, but that's just my opinion. On track number 4, Into the Light, Sarah Hudson very unshamefully sings about getting high over an instrumental that I actually liked quite a bit. This is another instance where I like the song's drop a lot more than its vocals, and while it does contain the same kind of gargling lead that Snails uses in most of his music, I will say I do like that melodic edge that the lead has in this song in particular. I'm pretty sure Snails hadn't really done that before in a track. Russian Roulette, to me, probably made for the least memorable song in the album, and a lot of that is thanks to this appearance from Panther, who is just spouting nonsense the entirety of the song. Death wishes. Death wishes. I don't care, I'm already dead. Other than those, and of course Liam Cormier and Travis Richter, I surprisingly did not have a lot of issues with this guest list. I think OV's appearance on Smack Up as Foreign Beggars is actually one of the more humorous, witty, and overall enjoyable appearances I've ever seen from a rapper in dubstep. Max's vocal build-up on the song To The Grave is actually really cool as well, with him kind of raising the pitch as the drums and the beat is getting more intense toward the drop. And Sullivan King absolutely screams his heart out on the King Is Back remix. When you get into the producer features, though, things do get a little bit tricky, and that's mostly because Snails kind of lets his collaborators take the lead. Forever sounds like most of the other heavy stuff Dion Timmer has done in the past. The song Only Want You is very distinctly a Nightmare song. In fact, Snails' influence on this track can really only be heard a few different times with those little licks where you get the kind of vomit sounds kind of playing in the background, but really everything else from the kind of future bass synths to the vocals really is Nightmare. Without even making an appearance, Skrillex's influence is all over this album, most notably on the song To The Grave. In fact, this first drop of this song sounds so out of Skrillex's discography that I actually had to check to make sure High Tide wasn't some new side project of Skrillex's, which it's not. The end of Smack Up also seems to be paying tribute to Skrillex by means of its kind of fake drop that's very reminiscent of Holla Out, Snails' collaboration with Skrillex. Moving on though, like I had mentioned before, Sullivan King does have a decent appearance on the King Is Back metal remix that he did with Snails himself. But the song is completely ruined by its lack of high-end that could have been easily brought up with some nice like high-end electric guitar, but it ends up just being really bassy and kind of mushy in the end. I wasn't really crazy about this remix. I think it had a lot of potential, but it just didn't end up where it could have been. I guess I did save one track to talk about that I really liked, and that's the song WFSU, surprisingly. I mean, Waka Flocka does his thing, and it's annoying, especially during the drop, but whatever, really. He's a reputable name in the trap scene, and seeing Snails kind of take his sound and fuse it in with this modern trap sound is really cool, and what I was hoping he would do with most of this record, and kind of combining genres that are big right now and things like that. I don't feel like on most of this he was able to really successfully do that, but on this track in particular, I think he really hit the nail on the head. So in the end, as I said in the beginning of this video, this album is decent. I mean, there are a lot of things I do hate about it, but there are a lot of things I really like too. Snails is able, on this album, just as I anticipated, he was able to mainly differentiate himself from the rest of the EDM world. He still kind of holds this signature sound that really no one else has been able to replicate successfully. And in the end, the guest list ends up being pretty decent too. This album may not have been as cohesive or genre diverse as I had hoped, but But you know, Snails was able to craft an album that at least decently showed off his production abilities and his signature sounds, and for that, I still respect him a lot. And you know, at least through track 8, this album actually gave me a pretty good experience, even if it wasn't as mind-blowing as I thought it was going to be. For The Shell, I am feeling a solid 5.5 out of 10. As always, if you guys haven't listened to this yet, I have the Spotify link down in the description below. And if you guys have listened to this album, let me know your opinions on it down in the comments section. As always, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll catch you later. Peace.
Wow.